Hi, everyone, and welcome to the December 8th version of the infrastructure group conversation. I've got the agenda. Slides are linked from the agenda. And in our slides, we've got updates on availability, on recent incidents, our OKRs, updates from each one of the SRE teams, as well as the scalability and delivery team, updates on InfraFin. And then we also have a new update at the end of the deck, if you haven't seen that one, around a number of the dogfooding efforts going on throughout the department. So happy to take questions or talk about any of these items. There aren't any questions right now. If anyone wants to verbalize something, we can take that first.
Hey, Steve, a bit out of the left field, but something I've been discussing with Kevin is our monitor APM functionality never got to usage. Like we never got a lot of people to use it. And part of that was it wasn't working by default. It wasn't set up by default. So if we want it working by default, it shouldn't require you to install additional things. At the same time, we want to make sure that even self-managed customers have and users have a connection to us. So maybe we should go all services for that. So auto DevOps instruments your code automatically. You get metrics and logging and all those things, and they run on infrastructure that we control. But it would be hosted on GCP, and it would be there. Maybe Elasticsearch as a service, maybe Timescale DB as a service. And then as we grow and as it gets more expensive, we can move to self-managed Elasticsearch and self-managed Timescale DB on those on GCP. But how do you see that? Would you like to manage it ourselves from the start? Or would you say well, let's first prove that monitor APM can get to significant usage, and then we can then we can transition it, knowing that transitioning stateful data is a bit of a hassle. I'm wondering how to think about this. And this is a bit out of the left field and very little context, so I'd be happy to elaborate as well.
So just a little clarifying thing. This would be using some of the components that we have already in GitLab, but kind of defining them as a new somewhat complementary service to go along with an individual implementation. Am I kind of digesting that correctly?
Yeah, I'm not sure to what extent we already have it, but we already have in the interface some metrics functionality, for example. So in that sense, we already have it. But instead of asking you to set up Prometheus by yourself, we just pipe everything to our Prometheus receiving stack, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, curious if anyone else has some more thoughts on that. I do think about kind of all of there's a lot of new things that we're talking about doing and everything, and so the first thing that comes to mind is just all of the competing ideas for priority and time. But that aside, we should figure out whether this is a good thing to build out some more and whether or not it's the priority thing versus others.
Can I ask a question about that? I know we've got the cluster applications, and would that not be a better strategy to pursue, where we deploy those tools that you described in people's own Kubernetes clusters, and then we don't have the problems with PII or security and those side of things? Because we've already started on this journey of installing these tools and managing them through GitLab.
I believe that's the way it already works. Is when you enable the monitoring features, it deploys there's two options. There's the Prometheus that comes with the Omnibus that can actually reach into a Kubernetes cluster and start monitoring directly. So, but that of course has networking issues where if your GitLab is completely unnetworked with your Kubernetes, it can't access it. And I think we had some amount of like API, so Prometheus could get through the Kubernetes API to get to the targets to get the data. But there was also a one-click option to add a Prometheus server to your Kubernetes cluster to monitor things, and it would just manage the operator and all that for you. Back to Sid's question, a couple of years ago, I think there's still an open issue for this, where we had talked about doing this Cortex as a service to allow GitLab instances to send their data to us for self-service monitoring. So support could monitor customer GitLab installs, but also at the same time, it could actually be exactly what Sid was talking about, is basically using Cortex database as a service to run a large scale metrics as a service. Yeah, I think Joshua has the issue for that.
I mean, obviously metrics is different from logging and metrics and traces. I think what were you referring to?
We can keep it simple and talk about metrics first. And I love your suggestion, Andrew. We've tried that. I think it's not in a good state. So install with one click, as far as I understand, it's deprecated, and we prefer if people not use it. However,
we've got CAS. Sorry, go ahead.
We fail to tell people that. This is the first thing. It doesn't have any deprecation warnings. And the thing that we deprecated it because it didn't give enough feedback. So we have a new way to do it. And I have trouble finding it here, but I know it's in alpha. And if I can spell alpha, I'll be able to find it on the page. Crossplane is also in alpha. So this is what we actually want people to use. But we kind of scare people away, even though it's been available since 12.6 and it's the future. And it's halfway through on the page. So I think we do a very dismal job of pointing people towards what's best for them and what is the future. And then, so we now had 2 attempts at this. I think we can improve our docs, but people aren't using it. If you look at Monitor APM, if you look at the usage numbers, they're very, very low. So
could
I'd like for that to happen.
Link to that?
Sorry?
You said there's a link. I don't know where it is.
Oh, sorry. I'm not sure, but I just put the page that I showed in the chat.
Oh, there.
That's helpful.
Okay. Yeah.
One of the ideas, and actually we had some talks about this about a year and a half ago, was actually partnering with Grafana Labs to provide this as a service, either via them being like basically an external SRE team that would manage a Cortex cluster for us, and or whatever other features that we would want them to operate, because Grafana Labs is also doing logging and tracing now. But basically, either we basically pay them as a partner, or we pay Grafana Labs to operate it for us on our GCP account, so that we pay for the raw compute cost, but we don't have to hire. We don't have, like Steve said, we don't have the staffing to do this right now.
Yeah, and without discussing partnerships and commercial arrangement in a public call, but the suggestion would be, yes, purchase whatever you can. I agree with Steve. There's no bandwidth from infrastructure to do this. We first have to show the viability. So we have to contract with third parties. And that could be Elasticsearch for the logging part. That could be Grafana Labs or some of the other contenders for the metrics part. I'm not sure someone's selling tracing, but I'm sure if we have the other two, someone will be happy to make that for us. So, and then at some point when it reaches scale, it becomes probably convenient or like worth it to do it ourselves. But then we're at scale, it's a success, and we know that we can make the investment. So that's exactly the proposal. And good to know that Grafana Labs is also a good potential supplier for that. And for clarity, like it would be in GitLab, it would just be the Prometheus backend that is hosted. Andrew, do you wanna, you had a few follow-up questions.
Yeah, the one thing that I'm not super clear on, but it seems to be, it's going to help a lot with the managed applications, is the Kubernetes agent. And that will help us to deploy much more successfully into other people's Kubernetes clusters and read metrics out and plot them on graphs without having to have a direct connection into their Kubernetes clusters. And so my understanding was that that was going to enable a lot of these tools to be more successful, particularly the cluster applications.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to that. I made the same remark about our documentation pointing people in the wrong way about a month ago, as far as I know, and the documentation is not updated. So that tells me that it's a low priority, and that doesn't give me a lot of faith that this will be ready. And what we're seeing is that providers like Datadog are having a lot of success with a SaaS-only offering. So I think it's very natural for GitLab as like the open source tool to use the GitLab managed apps. But if so, we got to at least start pointing people in the right direction.
One interesting note from our recent software usability score service is that there were multiple people who were interested in monitoring capabilities without Kubernetes. And so that came up, I think, 2 or 3 times out of, I forgot how many responses we got, but that was quite interesting to see that come through in the SUS score.
Yeah, I think that's, we're a bit ahead of the curve. Like people are talking a lot about Kubernetes, but in reality, not a lot of people are doing it. So what you see with, well, for example, the 5-minute production app, it's basically what we already can do in Kubernetes, but now doing it with Terraform and managed services. And it seems that that's still the sweet spot for popularity. And in the end, like popularity is what really helps people. So yeah, good remark that the managed app all assume Kubernetes.
Just one other comment on that while we're still on the topic. We've got this component that we deploy into all of the different services at GitLab. It's called LabKit, and it does all of our instrumentation and our metrics. And at the moment, we're busy moving it over to OpenTelemetry. And one of the things that's been really interesting about OpenTelemetry is how easy it's going to be to drop in different backends for tracing and for metrics, and in the future for logging as well. And so if we were looking for something where we wanted to be able to ship those off to different providers, it would probably be quite a good idea to build that on top of OpenMetrics, because it's giving us quite a good platform to connect to lots of different services in an easy way. So just a thought.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. At the same time, I have a bit of scar tissue that the previous attempt at metrics APM wasn't a success. We tried to build it on open standards and it wasn't there. And what is a success is Datadog, and their agents are open source. So maybe we should take those agents, support them, or contribute back configurability, and then make those endpoint GitLab endpoints and make sure that people are set up out of the box, because I see the promise of OpenTelemetry. I just think it's going to take a few years before, if you install it, you have not just the basic metrics and scraping the basic Prometheus endpoints, but it's really like instrumenting a lot of your application by default. And I think that working by default is what people, where we can impress people.
I went in with a very, very skeptical sort of first assumption about it, and I've been pleasantly surprised. I mean, you're probably right, but it's a lot better than I imagined it was after using it for a while.
And that's great. And then maybe that means we can switch in 2 years down the line. I think otherwise we run the risk of being like at the forefront, but we have to kind of aim for something with a bit more popularity behind it. And I just don't want to repeat. I don't want to repeat. I think this time, if we start pushing a bit on Monitor APM, it should work out of the box. It should. I think the user experience should be as easy as Datadog. I think that's the company that figured it out, and they just have great default experiences that just all work, and we should strive for that. And I think SaaS is a part of that. And I'm sure that if we make something that works and people use, everyone will be screaming from the rooftops that they also want it self-managed, and then we can add it as a managed app and all those things.
Right. That was a great discussion around that, including I think a good insight into like some strategy around when we take a look at these things, how we can extend out into new features and capabilities, and then look to like bring that back in when it's successful.
Well,
Go ahead.
I'm gonna putting a link. There's a document. There's a slide deck that describe many of these elements that we just talked about. It is in the note here. If any of you have additional thoughts, comments, questions, I'd love to hear from you as well. I think I put the wrong link in.
Oh,
hold on 1 second.
You'll get the right one. Thank you, Kevin.
Here we go.
Any additional questions? Go ahead and just verbalize them, and we can get them in the agenda. All right. If there aren't any more questions, please take some time to, if there are any other things that come up, you can always reach us in Infra Lounge and in Slack, or ping one of us on the deck there. Thanks everyone for your time.